In the history of mankind, the Turks can be called one of the peoples with imperial thinking, along with the Persians, Greeks, and Romans. The ancestors of the Huns lived in Inner Mongolia, located in the territory of northern China. They were nomads, lived in felt yurts, bred sheep, cows, horses, camels, ate mare's milk, kummus, and cheese, kurt. Tengrianism was the worldview of the nomadic Turks, which is the most ancient worldview of the Proto-Turks, going back centuries and counting several millennia. Tengrianism is a system of religious views that determine the actions and deeds of people. This is the unity of man and God, the harmony of man and nature, man and society, and the veneration of the spirit of ancestors. The Huns, like all Turkic nomadic peoples, had strong family ties. They maintained peaceful relations. The nomads knew their genealogy up to 30 generations. The ancient nomadic Turks, unlike sedentary peoples, had a law prohibiting marriages with kinship up to the 7th generation, which contributed to the birth of genetically healthy offspring and the formation of a genetically healthy nation. At present, this custom has been preserved among modern Kazakhs, which is strictly observed. According to the latest genetic research published by the Russian YouTube channel Archaeology, History, Genetic Research in 2021, the Turkic language, and accordingly the Turkic ethnic group, was formed in the 3rd century BC, together with the creation of the Hunnic nomadic empire. Therefore, the history of the Turks is over 2,000 years old. Moreover, according to scientists, the Turkic ethnic group was formed several centuries before the creation of the First Hunnic Empire, at the beginning of the 1st millennium BC. Thus, the history of the Turkic ethnic group is about 3,000 years old. The Huns constantly moved to the northwest, fought with the Indo-European peoples, the Aryans, Tocharians, and Yuezhi, and mixed with them. The ancestral home of the Indo-European peoples is Altai, southern Siberia, from where they came during the 2nd and 3rd millennia BC, migrated across Eurasia. The result of assimilation is the emergence of the Y chromosome haplogroup R1a and R1b of the North Eurasian group, ancient Aryans, among the Turks, transmitted through the male line. According to Chinese sources, in the 27th century BC, the first Chinese emperor Huangdi fought with the nomads of the Sinan, the ancestors of the Huns, who later became known as the Hienon, Kun, Gong, and at the end of the 3rd century BC, the Hiennu. This is confirmed by the Chinese chronicles of the Book of History, which tells of wars with the nomads that took place around 2500 BC. The Chinese chronicles also indicate that in 1818 BC, a descendant of the ruler of the imperial Shi dynasty fled to the north and found refuge with the Huns. Chinese sources mention wars with nomads that took place between 1400 and 200 BC. The sources mention diplomatic contacts and conflicts between nomads and Chinese states in 1138, 1127, 714, and 689 BC, as well as in the memoirs of Mencius, a follower of Confucius, 372 to 289 BC. Thus, Chinese historical documents dating from 828 BC contain constant references to the Huns, which suggests that the history of the Turks and the Proto-Turks is 4,700 years old. In the 3rd century BC, a single state, the Han Empire, was created in China. In the 3rd century BC, the Huns also created a tribal union of 24 Hunnic tribes. In 225 BC, Kagan Duman became the first emperor of the Huns, whom the Chinese called Shan Yu, and the Huns called Tengri Kutu Janie, or Tengri Kut, which in Turkic meant messenger of heaven. In 210 BC, Duman's son Bagadur or Mode, according to Chinese sources, became the Tengri Kut of the Huns. The ancestors of the Mongols, the Tungus tribes of Dunhu, lived to the east of the lands of the Huns. According to a legend preserved by the Huns, and in accordance with Chinese sources, the Tungus, having learned about the change of rulers among the Huns, demanded their best horse. Mode, despite the objections of his entourage, ordered the horse to be given. After some time, the Tungus demanded one of Mode's wives. Mode, despite the objections of his entourage, ordered the wife to be given. When the emboldened Tungus demanded the neutral territory lying between them, about 500 kilometers wide, Mode said, "Land is the foundation of the state. How can it be given away?" Using the element of surprise, he quickly gathered an army and routed the enemy. According to the English historian Edward Parker, who lived in China in the 19th century, Mode or Bagadur was one of the great conquerors in world history and can rightly be called the Turkic Hannibal. He conquered the southern territories from China and created a huge nomadic empire from the Pacific Ocean to modern Turkestan. In 200 BC, the Chinese emperor Liu Bang, worried about the raids of the Huns on the northern borders, set out with a huge army to the north to the province of Shanxi. Mode set out to meet them with an army of 100,000. During the battle, the Huns, following the centuries-old tactics of nomads, began a feigned retreat and stretched out the Chinese army and then closed the encirclement, cutting off part of the Chinese warriors, led by the emperor, from the rest of the army. The emperor found himself surrounded without food for 7 days. In winter conditions, the situation became critical. Liu Bang sent his men to his eldest wife, Modu, with gifts and a plea to leave a passage to escape from the encirclement. Modu, succumbing to the persuasion of his wife and trying to avoid bloodshed, allowed the Chinese army to retreat. Despite the retreat of the Chinese army, the war continued. In 198 BC, China concluded a peace with the Huns, humiliating for the Chinese Empire, on the condition that the emperor's daughter be married to Modu and an annual tribute be paid. In 177 BC, Modu defeated the Yuezhi people, related to the Scythians, who lived in the west of the Hunnic Empire, thereby expanding the borders of the Hunnic Empire. Mode moved the capital of the empire from Ordos, located in the south near the Chinese Wall, to the north to Outer Mongolia. The Gobi Desert became a natural obstacle for the Chinese Empire, making it difficult for the Chinese army to attack the Huns. According to Chinese sources, Mode conquered 56 different peoples and included them in the Hunnic state. China was forced to open barter trade on the border, fairs, which was beneficial for the Huns. The number of Huns was from 1.5 to 2 million people. The Huns could put up an army of up to 300,000 people, although the population of China was almost 60 million people. The Huns created a decimal system of military administrative structure of the army, preserved among the Turks to this day, and the division of the army into the left and right wings. Tengri Kurt or Shan Yu, according to Chinese sources, was the supreme ruler, the supreme commander-in-chief, and possessed the fullness of supreme power. According to the data of the Kazakh historian Altai Amanjolov and the sinologist Kairat Gabetxhanoglu, based on Chinese sources, in the 3rd century BC, the Huns had their own runic script. The empire kept records of population growth, tax collection, and correspondence. Mode reigned until 173 BC, almost 37 years, and left a powerful state to his descendants. The people called him Bagadur, which means winner. According to the English historian Edward Parker, the Great Wall of China, built to protect the Chinese Empire from the Huns, became a bloodline, a line of thousand-year confrontation and struggle between two great peoples, the Huns and the ancient Chinese, along which millions of human lives were lost. The Chinese Empire recognized the Hun state as equal to the Han Empire and regularly paid tribute in the form of silk, various goods, millet, wine, and food products. There was a constant struggle between China and the Huns for control of the Great Silk Road, opened in the 2nd century BC, which brought in large incomes. In 174 BC, Kayak, the son of Mode, known as Laoshan Shanyu, ascended the Han throne. He continued his father's work, expanding the empire to the west. In 166 BC, Laoshan Shanyu went to war against China, capturing many prisoners and property, and burned the emperor's summer palace. In 162 BC, Emperor Wang Di asked for peace with the payment of an annual tribute. This was the peak of the Hunnic Empire's power. Laoshan Shanyu died in 161 BC. In 166, 159, 144, and 129 BC, the Huns continued their military campaigns in China and reached Beijing. As a result, a balance was established between the Han Empire and the Huns. After Laoshan's death, his son Yun Chen ascended the throne, and in 152 BC, a treaty was concluded with China, according to which border markets were opened, beneficial for the Huns, who were in dire need of agricultural products. In exchange, the Huns offered cattle, skins, and handicrafts made of leather. In the winter of 126 BC, Chanyu Gunchen, grandson of Mode, died. In his last years, he waged a 6-year war with China. His brother, Ichisi Chanyu, ascended the throne, and with his raids he destroyed and plundered the northern provinces of China. In 102 BC, Hulugu became Chanyu. At this time, the Chinese army began an offensive to the northwest in the area of modern Jungaria. Hulugu defeated the Chinese army and sent a letter to Emperor Wu Di demanding an annual tribute and the opening of border trade with the Huns. By 90 BC, the Hunnic Empire had restored its power. From the middle of the 1st century BC, the Huns began to experience a political crisis, which resulted in a split between the tribes. China, unable to defeat the Huns by force, split their ranks by bribing their leaders. In 48 AD, 8 southern Han clans decided to separate, elect a new Khagan, and create their own southern Khaganate. The southern Khaganate, a vassal of China, a buffer between China and the northern Han Khaganate, began a fratricidal war with the northern Han Khaganate, which involved the Xianbi tribes, the ancestors of the modern Mongols. In 50 AD, in the winter, the northern Huns defeated the southern Huns, pushing them back to the south, and began raiding China. In 63 AD, China concluded a treaty with the northern Huns and opened up border trade, but Hunnic raids continued. In 83 AD, China began a war with the Huns that lasted for several years. The northern Huns suffered heavy losses from the Chinese and southern Hunnic forces. In 89, 91, and 93 AD, the Chinese army, together with the southern Huns, inflicted 3 major defeats on the northern Huns. Shanyu Uchugan, the last of the Mode dynasty, died in 93 AD. From this time, power passed from the Mode dynasty to the Huan dynasty. The Mode dynasty of Bagadura ruled the Hunnic Empire for almost 320 years. Beginning in 106 AD, the Hunnic War with China continued in East Turkestan, northwest China, for 50 years. The northern Hunnic Khaganate, after 400 years of existence, under pressure from the Chinese Empire, collapsed in 165 AD. With the fall of the Hunnic Khaganate, the era of great confrontation between the Huns and China ended, which lasted 2,865 years, starting from the Chinese Emperor Huangdi, almost 3 millennia. The southern Hunnic Khaganate lost its independence and became part of China in 215 AD. After the collapse of the empire, part of the Huns remained in China. The other part of the Huns, about 100,000 people, mixed with the Tungus Shanbei. The Shanbei dictionary, discovered by scientists, was considered Mongolian for a long time, but in fact turned out to be Turkic. Some of the Huns went to the Kazakh steppes. In 200 years, the Huns, who had settled in the territory of modern Kazakhstan, invaded East Turkestan, Central Asia, Afghanistan, India, and created the Heptalite Empire, which lasted for almost 150 years. Some of the Huns went to the Volga River Valley, from where, 200 years later, the Great Migration of peoples to the west began. In 370 AD, the Huns living on the Volga began an offensive on the Black Sea steppes, where the warlike Germanic tribes of the Ostrogoths lived. Beginning in the 3rd century, the Goths conquered a vast territory from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, from the Tisa River to the Don River. The Ostrogoths were defeated by the Huns, and the Ostrogothic king Hermanarich committed suicide in despair. After the death of Hermanarich, the Goths elected a new leader, Vitimir, who fought against the Huns for several months, but was defeated in battle and died. The majority of the Ostrogoths, led by Widerich, the son of Hermanrich, submitted to the Huns. The rest of the Ostrogoths went west, under the protection of the Eastern Roman Empire, creating great problems for the Romans in the future, including armed clashes. The Visigoth king, Athanaric, met the Huns on the Dniester River and tried to resist, but was defeated. After the defeat, King Athanaric went with his army to the west and further to the Western Roman Empire. Under the pressure of the Huns, the migration of Germanic peoples to the west began, to the territory of Italy, Gaul, Spain, and further to North Africa. The ancient Turkic states owned the Crimea and the Black Sea steppes for 1,400 years, until 1783, when the Russian Empire annexed the Crimean Khanate. In 384 AD, a detachment of Huns invaded the Asian provinces of the Roman Empire through the Caucasus into Mesopotamia and attacked the city of Edessa. A few years later, another invasion of Hunnic troops took place in Armenia, Mesopotamia, and Syria. The Huns, starting in 386 AD, began to raid the Roman Empire. The Romans were forced to pay off the Huns with gold. Sometimes the Romans hired the Huns as mercenaries. In 395 AD, the Roman Empire was divided into the Eastern, with its capital in Constantinople, and the Western, with its capital in Rome. Until 412 AD, the Hunnic headquarters were in the Black Sea region, where the Byzantine embassies were also located. In 422 AD, the Huns invaded Pannonia, Hungary, and reached the Rhine River. Some authors write that the Hunnic Empire extended to the Baltic and North Seas. Pannonia, located on the territory of modern Hungary, became the capital of the Huns, in which the embassies of other states were located. According to the recollections of contemporaries, the Huns in Pannonia spoke 4 languages: Hunnic, Turkic, Greek, Latin, and Germanic. In Pannonia, the Hungarian Pushta, Similar to the Black Sea steppes, there were pastures for grazing cattle. During 425 to 434 AD, the three brothers, Rua, Oktar, and Attila's father, Munzduk, were the rulers of the Huns. In 434 AD, Attila, the son of Munzduk, born in 395, became the Khagan of the Huns. In his youth, Attila was sent to Rome under the existing system of exchanging hostages between the Huns and the Roman Empire. He lived there for several years. The Romans treated him like a prince. Attila lived at the court of the emperor, studied the system of governance of Roman society, the art of war, and their language. According to contemporaries, Attila spoke Greek and Latin. In turn, in 406 AD, the Romans sent the future commander Flavius Aetius to the Huns as a hostage in exchange. Attila and Aetius knew each other, and they would meet in the future in the Battle of the Cataluian Fields. Attila ruled jointly with his brother Bleda until 444 AD. After the tragic death of Bleda while hunting in 444 AD, Attila became the sole ruler. In 437 AD, Attila conquered the Germanic kingdom of the Burgundians on the Rhine. After the death of the Burgundian king Gundahar and his sons, the Huns created a huge state from the Rhine to the Volga. In 441 AD and 445 AD, Attila invaded the Eastern Roman Empire in the Balkans and won. In 445 AD, Emperor Theodosius was forced to conclude a humiliating peace treaty on difficult terms with the payment of a tribute of 2 tons of gold and an annual payment of 600 kilograms of gold, with the loss of a number of provinces on the Balkan Peninsula, where the Hunnic military garrisons were stationed. In 451 AD, Attila began a war with the Western Roman Empire. The reason for the war was the refusal of Emperor Valentinian to give his sister Honoria in marriage to Attila. Honoria, in return, conducted secret negotiations with Attila, writing him a letter proposing a dynastic marriage. Honoria hoped that marriage to Attila would allow her to gain the right to rule the empire. Attila hoped that by marrying Honoria, he would annex the Western Roman Empire. Emperor Valentinian, suspecting Honoria of treason, imprisoned her in a monastery. Attila's army invaded Gaul, modern France, captured a number of cities in Gaul, but was unable to storm the city of Orleans and retreated from it. Flavius Aetius, the governor of the Roman province of Gaul, was appointed commander of the Roman army. Flavius Aetius spent several years as a hostage among the Huns in his youth, learned the language and customs of the Huns, and knew Attila well. In June 451 AD, the Battle of the Cataluian Fields took place, the largest battle in human history, the Battle of the Nations, in which about 400,000 people participated on both sides. Despite the approximate equality of forces, the losses were enormous on both sides. About 35,000 people died. The East Germanic Ostrogoth tribes fought on the side of the Huns, while the West Germanic Visigoths, Franks, and Gallic tribes fought on the side of the Romans. The Visigothic king Theodoric of Toulouse died in battle. As night fell, Attila retreated to a fortified camp. The Huns' position was becoming critical. The Romans had the advantage, but Aetius, fearing both the Huns and the strengthening of the Visigoths, sent the Visigoths and Franks back home. Attila decided to retreat, and the battle ended in nothing. A year later, by order of Emperor Valentinian, Aetius was killed. When Valentinian asked his noblemen about the correctness of this order, he received the answer that he had cut off his left hand. Soon Valentinian was killed as a result of the internal political struggle for power in the Roman Empire. In 452 AD, Attila crossed the Alps and invaded Italy, capturing and plundering a number of cities in the north of the country. When the Huns approached Rome, the Roman emperor asked for peace. Emperor Valentinian sent an embassy to Attila, headed by Pope Leo I. The Pope, on behalf of the entire Christian world, asked to spare Rome, a city with world culture, with the payment of a huge tribute on any terms. On July 6, 452 AD, Attila announced the agreement reached on the withdrawal of the Hun army from Italy. Attila spared Rome. Perhaps the reason for Attila's decision was the plague epidemic that began in the Hun army and the huge booty collected during the military campaign in northern Italy. Thus, diplomacy saved Rome. Rome rejoiced. Pope Leo was canonized by the Church and added to the ranks of saints. At the same time, the Roman Catholic Church declared Attila the scourge of God. In the ancient German ballad, the Saga of the Nibelungs, Attila is sung under the name of Etzel. Attila's name entered the history of the Germanic peoples. He had extraordinary diplomatic skills, was able to unite the Turks and Germanic tribes, and enjoyed great authority among the German leaders. In a number of European peoples, many legends and tales have been composed about Attila. At the beginning of 453 AD, Attila began to prepare for a new campaign against the Romans. In the future, he was going to conquer both empires of the Romans. However, in March 453 AD, Attila died unexpectedly after his first wedding night with a Burgundian beauty named Ildiko. The Huns buried Attila with great honors. At the burial site, according to nomadic traditions, they drove a herd of horses to hide him. Attila's empire began to disintegrate. Attila's sons, Elak, Dengizik, and Ernak, could not hold it. Uprisings began among the conquered people. The Germanic tribes of the Ostrogoths and Gepids rebelled against the Huns. In 454 AD, the Huns were defeated in a battle with the Ostrogoths. Some of the Huns went to northern Italy. Some of the Huns migrated east to the Black Sea steppes under the name of the Uturgurs and the Kuturgurs. The rest dissolved into other European nations and also became part of the future Hungarian people. The Hunnic Empire finally collapsed in 465 AD, having existed for almost 100 years. The Huns played a major role in world history. They dealt a crushing blow to the Western Roman Empire, which soon collapsed. However, Attila did not have time to capture the Eastern Roman Empire, which lasted another 1,000 years. The Great Migration of peoples began. In 410 AD, the Romans left the British Isles. The Germanic tribes of the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, under pressure from the Huns, began to move to the British Isles at the beginning of the 5th century, laying the foundations of the future British nation. Having defeated the Germanic states of the Goths and Burgundians, the Huns probably stopped the Germanization of southwestern Europe, as well as the Slavs. In the 6th century, the migration of Slavs to Eastern Europe and the Balkans began, and in the 7th century, the first Slavic states appeared. In 165 AD, the northern Hunnic Khaganate collapsed. Part of the Huns moved to the territory of modern southeast Kazakhstan, the Tarbagatai and Simirece regions. The Hephthalites' headquarters were on the Talas River in southern Kazakhstan. The ruling Turkic elite of the Hephthalites consisted of Khans and Tagans. The Hephthalites were nomadic Turks, lived in felt yurts, had herds of sheep, cows, and horses, camels. They were Tengrists, worshipped the sky and the sun. Their rulers were Khans and Tagans. The Hephthalite Turks assimilated with the nomads of Iranian origin, but constituted the upper echelon of power. In historical sources, they were called White Huns. They were mainly of the Caucasoid type. Some of the Hepthalite Huns went south to the territory of modern Uzbekistan and Afghanistan, conquering these territories. In 427 AD, the Hephthalites began an invasion of Sassanid Iran, but were defeated by the Persian king Bahram. In 438 AD, Bahram died, and his son Yazdegerd ascended the throne, who fought with the Hephthalites. In 454 AD, Yazdegerd was defeated by the Hephthalites and died in 457 AD. The Hephthalites in 459 AD supported and helped the eldest son of Yazdegerd Peroz to lead the Sassanid kingdom. However, in 475 AD, Peroz began a war with the Hephthalites and suffered a crushing defeat from them. The Hephthalite Khagan, Vakhshunvar, who ruled from 450 AD to 490 AD, in 457 AD conquered a huge territory, including Takharistan, Badakhshan, eastern Turkestan, the cities of Karashar, Kucha, Khotan, as well as Kabul and Punjab on the territory of modern Afghanistan. From 465 AD, the Hephthalites began the conquest of northwestern India, captured Gandhara, and inflicted a heavy defeat on the Indian Gupta Empire. In 484 AD, the Persian king Peroz began a new war with the Hephthalites, during which he suffered a heavy defeat and died. The Hephthalites became a serious threat to the existence of Iran as a state, and the Persians paid tribute for 2 years. After this war, a truce came between the Hephthalites and Iran, which lasted until 503 AD. During this period, the Hephthalites transferred their main forces to the conquest of India. In 503 to 513 AD, open hostilities took place between the Hephthalites and Iran. The ruler, or Tengin, of the southern ruling branch of the Hephthalites, Toraman, who ruled in Kabul from 490 to 515 AD, conquered India to the Indus River and Malwa, and expanded the southern borders of his state. This was the first conquest of India by the Turks, and it would be repeated many times over the centuries. By 500 AD, Toramana, having become the ruler of the independent southern empire of the Hephthalites, was proclaimed the supreme ruler of the emperor of northern and central India, marking the beginning of the Turkic rule in India. After the death of Toraman, his son Miharakula ruled India from 515 to 554 CE. In 516 CE, the Hephthalites sent an embassy to Nanjing, southern China, in an attempt to establish diplomatic relations. In 532 CE, the Indians revolted against the Hephthalites, led by Yasudharraman, and were able to liberate most of central and eastern India. Only in the northwest of the country did the Hephthalites retain their rule. After the death of Miharakula, the southern power of the Hephthalites in India began to weaken and existed until the beginning of the 7th century. Subsequently, the Hephthalite Turks adopted the language and religion of the conquered population and were assimilated by the Indians. In 565 AD, the Hephthalite Khagan Ghatfar, who ruled from 545 AD to 565 AD, provoked a fratricidal war with the Turkic Khaganate by killing the ambassadors of the Istemi Khagan who were heading to Iran, since he was in hostile relations with Iran. In 565 AD, in the area near Karshi, not far from Bukhara, a fratricidal battle began between the Hephthalites and the Turks. After the defeat and death of Ghatfar, the northern state of the Hephthalites gradually began to disintegrate. The Hephthalite state, after almost 150 years of existence, according to the Treaty of 568 AD, was divided between the Persians and the Turks. The border between Iran and the Turkic Khaganate passed along the Amu Darya River. The northern Hephthalites, as a people, dissolved in the peoples of Afghanistan and Turkestan, conquered by them. The Huns entered world history as a great people. The Hunnic Empire existed for 800 years, from the 3rd century BC to the 6th century AD.